alrededor de 1900. Cada ponente tiene aproximadamente 15 minutos para exponer y, como ha sucedido en cada mesa, al final tendremos 15 minutos para preguntas y respuestas. Adelante, gracias.
Okay, let's start. So, can you please start the presentation? I will start to talk to save some time. Dear colleagues, musical instruments play an important role in musical transfer processes. Two simple examples may explain this. Manufacturers of musical instruments also try to sell their products abroad, and musicians travel around with their instruments, and those ensure that the specific sound and instrument designs spread. This happens sometimes more, sometimes less quickly, and is related, on the one hand, to how sound expectation, and the possible further use of the musical instrument fit together, and on the other hand, to the recognition of the original product in the broadest sense. First of all, a brief overview. Yes, it's pushed hard. Yeah. Yeah. So let's see, I will talk on, I think, there we are. I will give an overview to the general background. We will skip the second point. Okay. It's you, it's me, it's absolutely me. So let's see. Now we will skip the second point with the general developments in music. I will tell you something about the development of the Prussian military music in the 19th century, give some points about the Prussian system of military music as a model for other states, and finally some conclusion and overall open questions. Before I come to the main topic, please let me sketch some general points which are important in this context. I cannot go into too much detail here. I would rather briefly recall the general situation. We have to look at some developments in the 19th century on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. In Central and South America, Spain loses its supremacy as a major colonial power in the course of the Spanish independence at the beginning of the 19th century. New states emerged that wanted to be developed, and some were looking for role models. But new conflicts also arose.
Perdón, tenemos otra vez retroalimentación del sonido en la cabina.
Were a direct consequence of the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. After Napoleon Bonaparte was pushed back, the conquest of Vienna in 1814-1815 led to a political new order. For 38 individual German states, the desire for a nation state came within reach with the founding of the German Confederation. Under the leadership of Prussia, this idea was to be continued in the following decades. This process was finalized with the founding of the German Empire in 1871. These developments were accompanied by increasing militarism, industrialization, and colonization. In addition to these political developments, the 19th century was characterized by a number of revolutionary inventions and further developments. These developments were the basis for, among other things, better communication and faster and more reliable trade, both continental and intercontinental. I would like to cite two examples for that. In 1838, the first steamship crossed the Atlantic Ocean. Steamships increasingly replaced tall ships from the middle of the 19th century. They could better operate independently of the wind, which led to more reliable connections and more connections in general, as you can see on this slide, with some connections leading to the North and Southern American continent. The second revolution is located in communication sector. In 1837, Samuel Morse invented the electromagnetic telegraph. 2 years later, William Fowell Cooke and Charles Wheatstone, we also know him for the concertina, constructed the needle telegraph. In 1846, 1847, Werner von Siemens and Johann Georg Halske designed their version of a needle telegraph. It was the starting point for a company which is still today an important leader in the industrial sector. Finally, on 27th July 1866, the first cable connection across the Atlantic was built. This resulted in a time saving of 12 days or more sending transatlantic messages. Added to this was the massive expansion of the railway lines. By 1900, the worldwide railway network had grown massively, as you can see from this map. With this in mind, I would like to begin focusing on a topic that tends to lead a niche existence in musicology, military music, in this case from the 19th century. However, with regard to the 19th century, military bands cannot be valued highly enough, both for their high musical quality and their status within the society. Military bands developed rapidly in the 19th century and, in my opinion, were some of the real driving forces behind the musical education of the so-called common people. Their bands roamed the streets playing, gave square concerts, played in pubs and public parks. In a way, they are the radio of the 19th century. For Prussia, one person in particular was decisive for the rise of military music, Wilhelm Wiebrecht. He was trained in the manner of the so-called town piper, Stadtpfeifer in German. In modern terms, he was a multi-instrumentalist. And he was a civilian who was appointed as director of all music choirs of the Garde Corps in Prussia in 1838. This meant that he had the highest post in Prussian military music and was thus able to determine both the musical direction and the instrumentation of the bands. Wiebrecht also had his own ideas about sound and tried to eliminate the tonal deficiencies that existed in the military orchestras of his time. For this, he needed a musical instrument maker as a partner and found him in Johann Gottfried Moritz. Together, they developed in the early 1830s a new instrument family, today known as Prussian cornets. These were instruments with different registers but a relatively standardized bore. This newly conceived, greatly expanded brass section formed the basis of Prussian military music in the second half of the 19th century. For the bass instrument of that family, the Prussian Ministry of Trade and Industry granted a 10-year patent on them on July 18, 1835. Everybody of you has heard about that instrument. It's the tuba. So here you can see the oldest preserved tuba from the Berlin collection, manufactured in 1839. And here on these slides you can see instruments from the different registers which have nearly the similar shape over years. As Wiebrecht was, as already mentioned, director of the Prussian military music from 1838, he was of course able to introduce his new instruments into the military bands quite easily. Taking this family of instruments into account, he devised new instrumentations for the individual military music formations. So the standardization of the Prussian military music began. Wiebrecht pursued two goals with his reform: to adapt the instrumentations of the military music choirs so that they would be more in line with tonal, artistic, and at the same time service military requirements, and to create a unified system that would enable the gradual expansion or interplay of several music choirs. In the years after 1838, Wieprecht continued to refine the instrumentation and developed his so-called Normal-Instrumental-Tableau, in English kind of standard instrumental tableau, which from June 1860 formed the guideline for the instrumentation of Prussian music corps. Wieprecht's system was well known in the military music circles of that time, and for sure other states had other systems. In 1867, an event took place as part of the Paris World Exhibition in that year. The competition between the military bands of Prussia, France, Austria, Bavaria, Russia, Spain, Belgium, the state of Baden, and the Netherlands. The bands had to play a piece of their own choice, as well as the overture from the opera Oberon by Karl Maria Weber. So the bandmasters had to compose an arrangement for their bands by themselves. Prussia won the competition with 20 votes, followed by France with 18 votes and Austria with 17 votes. However, to avoid political upsets, all three countries were awarded with the first place. The Prussian system was something of a novelty in military music, which quickly attracted interested parties from other countries. And so it seems particularly interesting that Wieprecht had already been invited by Turkey in 1847 to reform the military music there, and by Guatemala in 1852. The dates are interesting in that the fundamental attitude towards colonial endeavors also changed during this period. Whereas until then, military necessities had been prioritized over the acquisition of overseas colonial possessions due to Prussia's exposed position inside Europe, from the 1840s onwards, there was a systematic attempt to establish colonies, or at least to gain influence in order to gain economic advantages. Particularly in connection with Prussia's successful wars against Denmark, Austria, and above all France in 1870, 1871, it also became a military reference organization for many states, alongside the other major reference organizations, France and England. And especially in Central and South American countries, which were often under French influence, Prussia increasingly asserted itself as a model state from the 1870s onwards. This also resulted in a projective identification with the Prussian army, which was stylized as a perfect and was attributed the desired values of progress and modernity by the reformers of the individual states. And this also included Prussian military music in the style of Wieprecht. The reform of the military music in Guatemala by Wieprecht in 1852 is such a first example. But I'm not yet able to say to what extent Wieprecht actually carried out this reorganization, not whether instruments were already being exported from Prussia to Guatemala at this time. However, there are known sources for instrument deliveries a few decades later, which, by a small leap in time, should be made here, namely to the year 1897. There are several files that document exports of musical instruments to Central and South America, starting in 1879, which are documented in the estate of the Moritz Company, which is located at our museum in Berlin. On March 8, 1879, a contract was signed between Carlos Alban, the Consul General of the Republic of Colombia in the German Empire, and the company Moritz in Berlin for a major delivery of instruments. Here's some pages of this contract. The final order was not executed until 1902, and as can be seen from the other files. The time between commissioning and delivery is comparatively long. The exact reasons for this are not recorded in the files. But between 1899 and 1902, however, there was a civil war in Colombia. This may have been the reason for the delay in delivery, but this is only a speculation from my side. So I think most of you cannot read these old German written letters. So I had a transcription. Unfortunately, it's just in German, but I think many of you can see as well what it means. So we have a lot of these coordinates in all registers. Helicorns as bass instruments, French horns, trombones, saxophones, piccolo flutes, clarinets, oboes, bassoons, drums, and some other percussion instruments. And a comparison with the standard instrumental tableau from Liebrecht shows that the proportions were largely retained in the delivery. So I've made here an example with the brass instruments. Particularly in the case of the brass instruments, for which I have tried to break this down here, you can see that the proportions of the individual instruments or parts to each other are still entirely in Liebrecht's sense. At the same time, however, there were also adaptations such as the addition of percussion instruments and instruments such as saxophones, which were quite uncommon in Prussia at that time. It can therefore be summarized that the Prussian system of military music served as a model and was refined with specific local preferences. The Prussian model is reinforced by another circumstances, as the boxes packed by the Moritz company contained not only instruments and instrument accessoires, but also a large amount of sheet music. Moritz worked together with music publishers to obtain the sheet music, in this case the music publisher Georg Plotho in Berlin. However, there are further lists of other music publishers whose sheet music was also intended for Columbia. As far as I've been able to investigate so far, it is exclusively arrangements for military orchestras, which of course makes sense in the case. Apart from a few marches, there are mainly excerpts from operas and operettas. So you can have a look at the sheet music obtained from Georg Plotho. I've made a list of the compositions there on the right side. Kind of transcription from that was in here. So that's a bit more in detail for those who can read it, and also the costs. So in the following years, after the First World War, the Moritz company supplied instruments and sheet music to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Argentina. Here's the title page of the contract between the Republic of Argentina and the Moritz company. Moritz delivered instruments for the military music school, École Militaire. And from 1904 onwards, the Moritz company also advertised these things with sheets and catalogs in Spanish language. So they made a quite effort to get into these states and deliver the instruments to these states. The delivery lists for Guatemala from 1904 list another item that is still missing to complete the role model, the uniform. And of course the instruments and the music also need the right outfit, and the Moritz company also supplied this. Here you can see a picture from 1875 with the typical colors of the Prussian army and the German army. And these uniforms were ordered also by Moritz by the company Mohr and Speyer in Berlin, which confirmed the following order on 26 March 1904, with which the army in Guatemala was supplied. And it's about 100 jackets or coats of blue woolen molten, 100 trousers of the same fabric with 2 red stripes on each side, 100 uniform caps of the same fabric, and 100 tufts of red fevers with gold-plated sleeves. The nice thing is that Mohr and Speyer sent a fabric sample to the Moritz company, which still can be found in these files today, and This makes it a little easier to imagine the colors. And when you compare it, then it's interesting to see that it's very similar to that drawing on the other side already shown. Yes, I'm coming to an end. As further images show, musical instruments and uniforms, and certainly also sheet music, were also exported to El Salvador. Here you can see a greeting card to the Moritz Company from 1924. On the photo you can also see the uniforms in the Prussian style. Also here with these feather hats, and some of the instruments can be seen here. That's another photo of the same military band, Banda de los Superos Pudaros, unlabeled, probably from the same time, from the 1920s. And as can be seen here, another one from the same banda. And it's interesting because it's signed here down under with Paul Müller. So the greeting card is from the ensemble director, and that's also one thing what's happened besides the music, the sheet music and the musical instrument, that, yes, let's so say, also the music director was exported from Germany to conduct the first bands, and until they are, I don't know, in a condition that they can do it by themselves. So, to come to an end, some of these influences can still hardly be overlooked today. Here's a picture from the year 2023 of the Colombian Presidential Guard. You can see clearly the color patterns and the Prussian helmets, the so-called Pickelhauben here. You don't find them in Germany anymore, for several reasons. So it can be summarized that the Prussian system of military music served as a model and was refined with specific local preferences. After the victory over France in 1871, at the latest, the German Empire began to gain increasing influence in Central and South America. Prussia, in particular, served as a role model, as can be seen from the adoption of military music structures, uniforms, and typical music. The question that arises in the future is of both the musical instruments and the sheet music. In what contexts was the imported music performed to that time? How fast has the important music found their way out of the military orchestras into the music in general? How long was this kind of tradition maintained? How were the military orchestras in the countries supplied previously organized? And can similar transfer processes be observed in civilian orchestras in these countries? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Christian. Can you hear me? Thank you, Christian. I think the words that you were looking for are los poderes supremos, los supremos poderes, the supreme powers. Okay. Emmanuel, are you there with us? Our next presenter is Emmanuel Marconi. Emmanuel, can you hear us? Emmanuel is going to present From Bookswood to Ebony, From National Production to Colonial Exploitation in the French Woodwind Instrument. Emmanuel, we cannot hear you. Emmanuel, can we taste your sound?
Hi,
Yes,
Jimena,
we
I don't
can
know if
hear you
can
now. Thank
hear
you.
me.
Yes, perfect. Can you initiate your video? Because we cannot see you now. ¿Se desconectó?
Yeah, I'm trying again. I don't know if now you can hear me. My mic is open.
Yes, your mic is open now. We cannot see you, but we can hear you.
And you should have my PowerPoint and my video.
Emmanuel, can you, do you have your presentation with you?
Jimena, le puedes pedir
Emmanuel?
que prenda su
I think we're losing you again. We're a little bit tight on time, so maybe we should start with Jonathan, and we can exchange places so we can go forward. Okay, I will present Jonathan first, Emmanuel, if you don't mind. Jonathan is going to present colonial heritage of the Duluth in Europe, exploring the use of materials derived from colonialism in lute making. Herencia colonial de la UD en Europa, explorando el uso de materiales derivados del colonialismo en la fabricación de la UD. Adelante, gracias.
Gracias. Can you hear me? Yes? Maybe we can get my presentation up. Well, as museums around the world look at the past and study their collection in different light, in particular regarding the colonial legacies, musical instrument museums should follow suit. Many collections don't necessarily have items directly acquired as part of the colonial predatory practices. However, the materials employed in their construction might escape a first scrutiny on the colonial trade. This paper will examine lutes and lute making within this framework in an attempt to study how items seemingly removed from the colonial trade are intrinsically linked to the colonialism and imperialism. So first, what is colonialism? According to the Oxford Dictionary, colonialism is the principal policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country and occupying it with settlers. A closely similar, often related term is imperialism. The main difference being that the fact that imperialism doesn't necessarily involve the occupation or settlement of the colonizing country in the conquered land. What is certain is that both are predatory practices and were designed to, to take advantage of an imbalance of power between peoples. Early trade between Africa and Europe, and even America and Europe, was not always necessarily strictly colonialist, but that doesn't mean it was fair. The way we perceive colonialism is in constant flux, and it's currently taking a tendency to reframe what is colonialism, who gets to define what's colonialism, and what is left out of this definition. Now, according to this definition that I just read, colonialism rule came late to Africa, as late as the 19th and 20th century, because it was only in that period where the settlement of European powers was established. Now, in the Renaissance, the modern consumer society begins. It's the wealth concentration and the luxury market lead to more skilled craftsmanship and the production of luxury art and goods, often manufactured with rare and exotic materials. And that trend eventually reached the Italian and German lute-making workshops in the 16th century. The use of materials employed in the constructions for lutes from the 16th to the 18th century can be studied through extant instruments, but also through historic documents. A well-known source for 16th century lutes studying is the inventory of Raymond Fugger. It was an inventory made in 1566, and it enlists about 400 instruments. I say about because we really don't know. There's groups of instruments that are not defined. Among those 400 instruments, there's 140 lutes, again, give or take. And these lutes are described either by the place they were made, by who made them, sometimes just by a color or a characteristic, but often it's described by materials. Now, if we see this list of materials, the conclusion would be that most lutes were made with ivory. But we need to see this in a socio-cultural context, and the Fugger were the richest family at the time in the world. So we can assume that most of their items were luxury items. So this is a list of luxury items. Another source is the inventory of the Tiefenbrücker, and it was made in 1581, and it also enlisted a large number of instruments. In this list, we find very similar materials, but we can see that materials like maple or yew were much more common and more prevalent than those exotic like ebony, ivory, or sandalwood. So
Entonces,
in this context, let's talk about the materials
en este contexto,
that are employed in the construction of lutes. Now, because of time and so on, I am not going to talk about the
Entonces,
materials that are endemic to Europe, and I am not going to get
y
into ebony and ivory.
disculpen, hay retroalimentación en cabina, no se puede interpretar.
And it falls outside of colonial as we define it for now, strictly speaking. So let's start with sandalwood. It's not, oh, there you go. The Fugger inventory, as well as the Fugger inventory, enlists lutes made of black sandalwood, and the Tiefenbrücker and the Fugger inventory talk about striped lutes with sandalwood and ivory. Now that's a little bit of a puzzle because sandalwood is not black and it doesn't really go very well with ivory. Instead, it's a very light-colored, fragrant wood. But maybe the conundrum can be solved with an etymological solution. And that is the word sandalwood is, it could be described as palo sandal in Spanish. And in Dutch, the word used for sandalwood is rosewood. Palisander, sorry, and palisander is also used as rosewood. So perhaps what they were talking about was sandalwood, rosewood. Or yes to all of them. Now, if we keep going with the whole etymological thing, so if we see rosewood, it's called palisander. And palisander could be palo sandal, but sometimes palo santo. If we go in the route of palo santo is also Guayacan, Hollywood, or lignum vitae, which is not rosewood. So that is a conundrum. On the other side, if we see the word zakerdam, which is also used for rosewood in Dutch, it's translated to jacaranda. And jacaranda is also used for rosewood, but in Mexico, jacaranda is this beautiful tree with purple flowers. And usually the city gets beautiful around April, May with these purple flowers. So one of the big problems of studying woods in a historical context is that of naming. And common names in wood are very tricky. We use the word rosewood for about 400 different species of wood. And then some species of wood, like rosewood from Rio, has about 20 different names depending on the culture and who's talking about it. So I think the museums, we should make a better effort to do scientific analysis of the wood so we can talk about them in a more certain way. So if we assume that it's rosewood, we can see that rosewood is a complex material because some of it is endemic of the Americas, from Brazil mostly, but some of them is also from Madagascar and India. So whichever way this material made their way to a lute maker, it was either colonialist or imperialism. More often we see these materials used in late lutes, like at the beginning of the 18th century, like this beautiful lute by Tilke. Brazil wood is a fascinating material. There is very few instruments known made of Brazil wood, though it was very common at the time. Now, Brazil wood is probably called Brazil because in Portuguese, the word for coal, like a bright red coal, is brasa. So in this case, is the wood that gives the name to the country and not the country to the wood, which I found very fascinating. Already from the first trip of the Portuguese to the Americas, when they were discovering the Americas, they found Brazil wood, and it was the first item that they exported back to Brazil. So Brazil wood was a trade commodity with the Americas before sugar or silver. So that is again like the colonialism versus trade. The first loads of Brazil wood were exchanged to the natives for things that the natives thought valuable, like scissors or textiles or trinkets. But after a couple of trips, the natives didn't want trinkets anymore. So Portugal establishes little trading forts where are already kind of a colonialism venture. At some point, that's a lute that is in the Fugger Museum in Babenhausen. I couldn't do scientific analysis, but I'm pretty sure that it's made of Brazil wood, one of the only ones known. As I said, the Portuguese settlers didn't have enough manpower to harvest and process the Brazil wood, so they were using local manpower. So the indigenous people will cut the trees, they will process the first sawing and quartering the logs, they will load them to the ships, and then they will be sent to Portugal. But as I said, after a few trips, they got tired of the trinkets, so Portugal started importing slaves from Africa to do the processing. Also, the trees in the littoral was scarce, so they would keep going farther and farther inland. So they had to settle more and more forts. So eventually, the wood becomes part of why the colonial trade starts in Brazil. Most of the wood of Brazil wood was sent to the Netherlands, where it was processed in the rasphuis, and it was in prisons. The inmates will turn the wood into dust, because the reason Brazil wood was exported, it was not because of the timber, it was because it's a precious material for dyeing textiles. So all the wood was turned into dust, and then dust will be mixed with water and turn into a dye stuff. Of course, not all of it did, because it made its way to some lute makers' workshop, but I am sure they were not importing the wood for lutes. It was for dye stuff. Guayacum is another wood that is mentioned in the Fugger inventory, and again, there is not a lot left, but in the inventory, the Fugger mentioned 4 lutes made of guayacum. Guayacum, or lignum vitae, was first imported from Spain, for the Spanish, from the Americas in 1508, so again, very, very early. And again, the Fugger family were the main importers of this wood. The reason they were importing it, and they started importing before 1524, it was, that's a beautiful wood, right? It was for the Holtz House, which was a hospital in which they would administer treatment with lignum vitae for the cure of syphilis. So for a long, long time, they were importing this wood to treat syphilis, but it was really not very effective. Yeah. But it was a half charitable house, so they were trying to cure goodwill, but not very effective again. So once again, this wood was not imported for lutes, but for another commercial enterprise. But it did make its well to lute making workshops. So this is the lute that I showed before. That one is a lute made by Sixtus Rauchwolf in Augsburg. And it's, I don't think, a coincidence that the main hospitals of wood of the Fugger were also in Augsburg. So eventually he got his hands on some of this wood and turned it into a lute. Snakewood is another wood that is endemic from the Americas, and to my knowledge, there are a very small number of extant lutes made of this material. Most of them are made between 1560 and 1700. It's endemic from the northern part of Central America, all the way from the Yucatan of Mexico to the Guyanas, but in particularly, it's very prevalent in the Dutch Guyana, nowadays Suriname. So the wood was first recorded by Robert Hanoncourt, who led an expedition to the Guyanas in 1609. And by 1660, the trade of this wood was established. So in 1660, George Warren wrote that speckled wood, or snakewood, is also plentiful enough, and it has been sold in England equal to the price of sugar, but it's too great and frequent importation is now become less of value. All lutes made of snakewood are constructed with multiple narrow strips, and this is likely because of the size of the timber and the planks that will be available in Europe, very similarly to ebony and these exotic materials. If you make a lute of maple, you have these big, large chunks of wood, and it's easy to process large ribs. When you have very precious materials, you get small planks. At least that's my theory. That's a lute in the Met in New York. It's a beautiful, beautiful lute. Now, in conclusion, lute making was certainly not the main drive behind the import of woods and ivory to Europe. Lute makers responded to a growing demand for luxury items made with these desirable, exotic, and new materials as they became available. European owners of luxury products were usually well aware of these materials' distant origins. Indeed, such exotic connections might add to the value and allure of this worldliness, sophistication, and good taste about these materials. In many cases, these multi-continent journeys were made viable through the exploitation and colonized and enslaved peoples and their environments. The political and ecological implications of these materials are increasingly being brought to bear in studies of material culture, and it's our responsibility to study and understand the role of these materials within our collections. Thank you.
Thank you, just in time.
Really?
Yes, 15 minutes, exactly. Thank you to Jonathan. And now we have Emmanuel with a pre-recorded presentation that we are going to transmit right now. Emmanuel is going to present from boxwood to ebony, as I said before, from national production to colonial exploitation in the French woodwind industry. Del boj al ébano, de la producción nacional a la explotación colonial en la industria francesa de instrumentos de viento.
Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. It is such a pleasure to be here today, even if remotely. Before I start, a very short preamble to avoid any confusion. This presentation has been conceived and submitted at the beginning of 2024, while I was the director of the Woodwind Instrument Museum in La Courtois-Beaussais. I no longer am. Since July, I'm the director of the Musikinstrumenten Museum in Berlin, which explain the logos and the affiliation you see on the slides. The garden element for ceremonial use is known since the Gallo-Roman time, and the production of woodwinds in France, as well of course in other European countries, for centuries has relied on the use of boxwood. In the region of Normandy, because of its excellent mechanical characteristics, no historical significant presence characterized by very slow growth. Nevertheless, occasional boxwood trees may have been found in the many forests which characterize this region, mainly along the Pyrenean mountains. The development of the woodwind manufacturing industry in La Courtois-Beaussais, as in many other centers, boxwood as the decorative garden element or for ceremonial use has to be related with the local presence of boxwood, as witnessed by some local sources and the actual toponymy of several small villages in the region of 20-kilometer radius where the village of La Courtois-Beaussais is located. No historical significance. The scarcity of this material presence of boxwood and the growth of the Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. It is such a pleasure to be here today, even if remotely. Before I start, a very short preamble to avoid any confusion. This presentation has been conceived and submitted at the beginning of 2024, while I was the director of the Woodwind Instrument Museum in La Courtois-Beaussais. I no longer am. Since July, I'm the director of the Musikinstrumenten Museum in Berlin, which explain the logos and the affiliation you see on the slides. But let's get started. The production of woodwinds in France, as well as other countries, for centuries has relied on the use of boxwood because of its excellent mechanical characteristics, especially density and hardness. Characterized by a very slow growth, boxwood trees historically did not grow in the whole French territory, but just in a few small areas, mainly along the Pyrenean mountains in the southern part of the countries, as you can see on the map. In parallel, the use of boxwood as decorative garden element or for ceremonial use is known since the Gallo-Roman time and reached its peak under the reign of Louis XIV. In the region of Normandy, where the village of La Courtois-Beaussais is located, no historical significant presence of boxwood trees is recorded. Nevertheless, occasional boxwood trees may have been found in the many forests which characterize this region. More specifically, the development of a woodwind manufacturing industry in La Courtois-Beaussais, as in many other production centers, as for instance in Poitiers, has to be related with the local presence of boxwood, as witnessed by some local sources and the actual toponymy of several small villages in a 20-kilometer radius or so. The scarcity of this material, though, and the growth of the production in La Courtois-Beaussais quickly exhausted the local boxwood resources to the point that a reliable 1804 source mentions the fact that the boxwood used in La Courtois-Beaussais and the neighboring villages, and I quote, comes from abroad, meaning that at the end of the 18th century, boxwood had already disappeared locally. The boxwood resources had to be very limited, as the number of makers active during the 18th century was limited to a couple of dozens or less. The installation of La Couture makers' shops in Paris, the switch to a proto-industrial manufacturing system with its consequent increased production will take place just in the first decades of the 19th century. In parallel to the decreasing availability of boxwood, which almost disappeared in France at the end of the 18th century, new species of wood, such as ebony, grenadilla, or rosewood, became increasingly accessible thanks to colonial exploitation, notably in Madagascar, Mozambique, Gabon, Ivory Coast, Senegal, India, Brazil, and other countries, were used to make up for the scarcity of traditional local species. At the turn between 18th and 19th century, La Couture-Poussey woodwind manufacturing industry, initially based on available local timber, started to entirely rely on woods imported from Turkey, that is the case of boxwood, or the colonies. The gradual switch from the use of boxwood available locally to ebony, rosewood and grenadilia symbolizes the transition from a proto-industrial manufacturing system based on a sustainable local circuit to an expanding local and globalized one, completely relying on colonial exploitation. The case of La Couture-Poussey is representative of this transition. From the 1840s, most of the instruments produced in the village are manufactured out of exotic woods, shipped from Mozambique, a Portuguese colony from the 16th century to 1975, and Madagascar, a French colony from 1897 to the 1950s. The new woods are advertised in the commercial catalogs that start being printed in the 1860s, and often the provenance of the wood is mentioned as an element of quality, especially for ebony, and this will last until at least the 1960s, when the Leblanc company is still advertising Mozambique ebony in one of its catalogs. Just one remark. If exotic woods as ebony were already known and used during the 18th century for the most precious instruments, for example by makers as Thomas Lott, boxwoods would be occasionally used in the 1910s for cheaper transfer flutes and clarinets for the système ordinaire, which is the term for pre-Böhm key system, still offered at the beginning of the 20th century and used by village or little town bands. How did these woods arrive to the village? Once cut down in the colonies, the trees were prepared to be transported to the nearest port, cleaned from the branches and probably sewn to some sort of standard size. Then, on a cargo ship, they arrived to the port of Havre in Normandy. Havre was the major commercial port of northern France, where all the timber trade passed. The case of colonial wood import in Havre is very interesting, as it becomes the main hub for colonial wood in Western Europe at the end of the 19th century, more important in terms of comprehensive offer than Liverpool or Hamburg. In 1930, 88 different species were imported and available for the market. If before the 19th century colonial woods have a marginal place in Havre, contrary to other colonial products as cotton or cacao, and although the Bois des Îles, island wood, meaning exotic woods, was imported since the 18th century, the proximity with Paris and the easiness of transport through the Seine or the railway in the second half of the 19th century contributed enormously to the development of the market dominant position. On a more technical standpoint, the wood that arrived in Havre in trunks was then sewn by local timber companies to the sizes and shapes required to the different industries, and then shipped via the Seine and the Eure River on large river boats. In the case of the woodwinds manufacture, the two most common shapes were the carrelé for the bodies and the larger, almost pyramidal element for the pavilions. Once arrived in the workshops, the wood was stored for a variable period, usually about 5 to 7 years. Larger workshops had special wood storage, and at least in the 20th century, with ventilation systems, with stocks for several years, as you can see in these images of the Leblanc factories dating back to the 1960s. To conclude, the production of woodwind instruments in La Couture-Poussey, based since the end of the 16th century on a short local circuit and the predominant use of fruit woods and boxwood, evolved at the beginning of the 19th century in a proto-industrial system and the extensive use of colonial woods, mainly from Madagascar and Mozambique. The local production relied then almost entirely on natural resources from the exploited trade. Thanks for your attention.
I'm so sorry for all the inconveniences with this pre-recorded video. This is the first video that we received pre-recorded, and it seems that when you send a file through, well, when you make a file in Zoom and you send it on WeTransfer, it loses a lot of quality. And so I think we couldn't see the images very well and other things. I'm very sorry with Emmanuel. I think we would rather have him here with us instead of in a pre-recorded video. Emmanuel, are you still there with us, or did you leave? I'm sorry, because I know it's late for you. But if you want to add something, we are more or less on time. More or less not.
I can do it live if you want. We can try if you can confirm that you can hear me from there.
I think we got enough.
I think we don't have that much time, but if you want to summarize something in maybe 4 or 5 minutes, please do. Or we can go to questions,
Hello?
comments. Yes, thank you, Emmanuel. So sorry for what happened with your video.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me and can you see me?
We can hear you and see you.
So this is Jean-Philippe for Jonathan and Emmanuel, if it's so, yeah. Thank you for your presentation, very much oriented towards the materiality of the objects and the raw materials needed for the making of these instruments. How each of you, I mean, maybe it's more difficult for remote times, like for the lutes than for the woodwinds, but can we have an assessment of the percentage of the quantity of wood that was used for musical instruments compared to the total trade? I know it's very difficult, but I was wondering, especially for the industrialization of ebony for Emmanuel, how big, because we know for ivory, we know for the keys of piano and the pool bowls, but I don't know if we have an idea, especially for the woodwinds and the ebony.
Shall I go first?
Yeah, maybe while he's connected.
Right. So for the lute, it's really hard to see what was the percentage. It was a very, very small percentage, of course. We have some trade records of the boats arriving to Europe, and usually that's where the material gets recorded, the first port of entry. But once it's sold, and usually it was sold at the port, and then it was transported by someone else to the producer, it's really hard to track down. So it's easy to see how much it arrives bulk. But after that, it is very, very scarce. The information we have is very scarce. With things like ivory, so I I had material for like about 2 hours of my presentation. Of course, we don't have time for that. But one thing that is very interesting is with the ivory and ebony and the whole triangular trade. So you get the ships departing from Europe going to Africa, loading slaves, ivory and ebony. Well, trading for goods that brought from Europe. Then it goes to America, to Brazil. They unload the slaves, load wood and other commodities, and then they go to Europe with the ivory and so on. So often the trades are mixed. So we have records of things that are imported. Now, maple and yew, for example, and cypress, they were cut and processed for musical instruments from the origin. So there is a little more records of how they get to the maker. Things like ebony, it was a plank, and then that plank you make do. That's why sometimes you have 20 ribs and sometimes you have 27 ribs, because the chunk of wood that you get is like this or like this. But yeah, no, I think in the 19th century you get much more information. For example, for the mahogany trade, there's a lot of material for the mahogany trade, and the piano makers buying the mahogany and the ivory tusks. But 16th century, well, maybe Emanuele has more.
I just would like that, can you confirm that you can hear me in the auditorium?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us? We can hear you. Can you hear us, Emmanuel?
Feels like a spiritual session. Can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Let me see if I can share my screen, because okay. Can you see my presentation now on the screen?
No.
No.
It's frustrating.
Should we get another
Apologies,
another
there's
question?
a problem with the screen sharing. And I don't understand why, honestly.
You have permission to share.
I don't know if I'm allowed to share the screen from Zoom. Can you check, please? Because it seems that I cannot.
Yes, you have permission since
Share the
since the
screen.
beginning. You had permission.
Yes, you have permission.
Yeah. But I don't know if you want to share my presentation with that audio, and then I can speak, because there's no way for me to share the screen at the moment. Apologies.
But we have seen your presentation already.
I think that I can.
Thank
Wait a
you.
minute, please.
Well, meanwhile, do we have any more questions?
afraid to use this thing. Jonathan,
Yes.
may we assume that the wood of the back has no particular effect on the tone?
Okay,
In other
wonderful.
words, that you
Perhaps we
could use
can
one,
try like that.
one wood or another, and it would
Okay,
not change
you
the sound?
can take, decirme cuando la cambie. ¿Cómo le digo?
The lute, it depends who you ask.
Can you see?
There's a lot of
Yeah, I can see it.
but we've seen the presentation.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
I can start.
There's
and I can
not enough
tell you when to change the
scientific
slide
evidence
now.
for it yet. Some musicians think that you can tell the difference of the sound. I think it affects a little bit, not as much as the soundboard. But I think what was more relevant of when you decide to use this material was the effect of the luxury item. So it's a material that is more expensive because it's exotic. I don't think it's because it sounds better. Yeah, yeah. There's another. Opa.
No, pero
You can start now.
No.
Okay, perfect.
No.
So, good afternoon. And before I start, I'm very happy to be here, even if not in person. So before I start, a very short
Sorry,
preamble.
Emmanuel, there are problems here.
Yeah.
Can someone tell him that we already seen his presentation? He thinks he's going to present now. Sorry? He cannot hear us. Cool. Wait.
Yes. Jonathan. Esto laúd hecho de madera de Brasil que has mostrado, ¿de cuándo es?
Ese es de 1577.
77.
Y fue construido por el mismo laudero que mostré antes con la madera de guayaco. Ese laúd fue específicamente construido para la familia Fugger en 1577 en Babenhausen. Bueno, vendido en Babenhausen, pero producido en Augsburgo.
Sí, porque yo he creído que era más temprano, entonces me preguntaba si no podría ser madera tracida por los normandos.
No, 1577, que ya era muy bien establecido el comercio para entonces. Digamos que 1530 el comercio es constante.
Sí, porque los franceses han hecho el comercio,
Claro,
más temprano.
y después los holandeses, ¿no? Empiezan los portugueses, después los franceses. Los franceses intentan hacer settlements, ¿cómo se dice? Asentamientos, pero los portugueses, en cierta forma, la invasión de los franceses, el comercio de los franceses impulsa a que los portugueses...
Justamente, era mi duda, porque los portugueses no estaban así tan interesados,
claro.
Pero a partir del comercio intenso que se intensificó con Juan, sí. Entonces me preguntaba si no podría ser una madera tracida por los franceses, pero no es importante.
Gracias.
I'm sorry, but we need to end this session. We don't have any more time. I'm sorry for all the mess that happened with Emmanuel's video. And I'm sorry, Emmanuel, I don't know if you can hear me. You have permission to share. I don't know what's happening there. But if anyone wants to share comments or ask questions to Emmanuel, please do. After, you can communicate with him and you can send him an email. And Emmanuel, I'm sorry that you're not here, and I'm sorry that's late for you. Sorry to keep you waiting. And well, we have to continue. Please, if you would like to stay with us, even if it's too late for you, please feel welcome. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Jonathan and Christian, for your participation. Just a little thing from the program. Unfortunately, Edmundo Camacho will not join us. So we have maybe 10 more minutes if you want to take some air, and we will start with Jamie. And then we have Jean-Philippe. And Caro, thank you for moderating. Okay, we'll see you in 10 minutes.
Ok, probando. Estado volteando. Ok. 1, 2, prueba de audio.
A ver si les por eso monitorealo en el celular.
Puede monitorear el Zoom.
Ahí está, ya estamos. Habla.
Monitoreo de Zoom. 1, 2, probando audio. Ok, probando audio. Prueba de audio para Zoom. Ok, 1, 2, sí. Probando audio para Zoom. 1, 2, ok, sí. 2, sí. Ok, probando audio. Sí, 2, 2, probando audio en Zoom. 1, 2, buenas tardes. Sí. Ok. 1, 2, sí. 2. Ahí te está llegando bien. Ok, perfecto. No se oye dobleteado. Ok. 1, 2, sí. Sí. Sí, 2. No, aquí no hay nada. Ok, sí. No sé si aquí esto, no veo otra cosa. Ok, 1, 2. ¿No se les dobletea? Ok, acá, en esto, no, nada. No sale acá, aquí no te llega todavía. Ok. Abran un Zoom de...
Tengo que abrir el micrófono de acá del Zoom de porque este es el anfitrión, ¿no?
Pero no se va a dobletear ahí.
No, déjame. ¿Cuál es el audio que abro? Micrófono. Igual que el CIMCIM. Aquí, ¿cuál es el que tengo que abrir del micrófono? Memo, igual que el sistema.
Ok, 1, 2, sí. ¿Están escuchando? ¿En Zoom se escucha este micrófono?
Entonces ya estamos.
Confirmamos. En Zoom se escucha este micro. En YouTube también. Afuera en auditorio también. Perfecto.
Ya, ahí está.
Ok.
Ven, señores. Ya, listo.
Hola, hola. Buenas tardes. Hola, hola, ¿me escuchan? Soy Edmundo Camacho. Aquí estoy conectada a la sesión Zoom. Estoy listo para presentar mi ponencia.
Prende, pero se vuelve a ir a rojo.
Hola, 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 hola. ¿Me escuchas ahí, Karime?
Oui. Jean-Philippe. Jean-Philippe. Très bien. Muchas gracias. Je ne comprends pas. I don't understand Spanish, but it's okay.
When your presentation.
Yes.
She's gonna use the
Okay.
5 and the 2.
Okay. Okay. Very good.
And then I will show you 2 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. It's good with me. I am used to it.
And then at 0 minutes I'll kick you
Okay.
until you stop.
Okay. And then you take a big machete and you. This is what you do. She does that.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Algo entiendo de inglés. When I have chaired sessions, I use a maraca. Yeah.
So, do you understand where to point the thing to change?
No.
No.
Oh, sorry.
You don't need to speak to it.
No.
You know?
I don't know. I think, this is arrows, so I think it's...
Ok, ok. Sí. Karime, ¿escuchas este micro? Sí. Karime.
Yo no sé.
¿Me escuchan ahí en el auditorio?
Sí, y también lo escucho en Zoom.
Sí. Entonces ahora voy a compartir mi pantalla para poner la presentación. ¿Dónde está? Aquí está. Compartir sonido. Bueno, le pongo compartir sonido, aunque realmente no voy a compartir sonido. No sé si ya se esté viendo la presentación.
Hola, Emanuel.
La presentación.
Sí. Muy bien. Entonces creo que estaría listo para comenzar. Ustedes me dicen cuándo.
Sí, bueno, buenas tardes. Voy a presentar la parte 3 de esta mesa de organología, muy interesante, por cierto. Y vamos a comenzar con Edmundo Ricardo Camacho Jurado, que nos va a hablar sobre transferencias, préstamos y apropiaciones, una singular arpa cromática en México en el último cuarto del siglo XIX. Adelante.
Sí, hola, ahí me escuchan, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Sí, bueno, muchas gracias, buenas tardes, gracias por la presentación y gracias a las organizadoras. Antes de comenzar, quisiera dedicar esta ponencia a los habitantes de la Gaza sitiada y bombardeada. Voy a iniciar. Desde su introducción en plantación en el siglo XVI, en estas tierras, en lo que hoy es México, el arpa tiene una presencia constante en las prácticas musicales de estas geografías. En este continuo histórico, el instrumento ha sido objeto de préstamos, pero también de apropiaciones culturales por parte de algunos sectores de la población. Recientemente, en una mesa de iconografía musical coordinada por Cristina Bordas en el Congreso ARLAC de la Sociedad Internacional de Musicología, ofrecía la primicia de lo que pienso es un modelo no documentado de arpa. En la presente ponencia busco situar el hallazgo de este modelo de arpa cromático en el panorama de los estudios del arpa en México. Consideraciones preliminares. Conocida es la riqueza organológica de México y también, hay que decirlo, la inexistencia de un Museo Nacional de Instrumentos Musicales o de música que pueda contribuir a la preservación de este patrimonio cultural. Parte de este legado cultural está constituido por la diversidad de modelos de arpa diatónicas presentes en las prácticas musicales tradicionales y populares en este país, que en la actualidad alcanza 20 tipos distintos de arpa aproximadamente. Es decir, la variedad de las arpas presentes en México, resultado de procesos de cambio musical, pero también de permanencias, hacen que este sea el país con el mayor número de modelos de arpa diatónicas, de marco, obviamente, en Latinoamérica y el mundo. Perú, que es el país que nos sigue en número de arpas, en variedad de arpas, cuenta con 5 según Paul Ferrier. En México, la mayoría de estas arpas han conservado su vigencia en el contexto de la ritualidad de los pueblos indígenas contemporáneos, y algunas más, que son las arpas más conocidas por la Sociedad Nacional Mexicana, corresponden al ámbito de la música mestiza: el arpa de Veracruz, el arpa mariachera, el arpa de Tixla Guerrero, el arpa trípode o de salón, esta última ya en desuso, donde su función ha sido la acompañar el baile y el canto. En los estudios que hasta ahora han dado cuenta de los distintos modelos del arpa presentes en la República Mexicana, iniciados a partir de finales de la década de los 70 por la arpista María Cárdenas Montes, 1978, esta autora documentó en el capítulo Arpas Mexicanas de su libro Arpa, Ave Fénix de la Música, 13 distintos modelos del instrumento. Después, en 1988, el etnomusicólogo Guillermo Contreras agregó a los ya documentados por Cárdenas un modelo más. Entre la publicación de los textos de Cárdenas y Contreras, en 1986 el lingüista y etnomusicólogo Fernando Nava publicó una nota en la que documentó el uso del arpa entre los indígenas mazatecos de Oaxaca, dato que 2 años después Contreras pasaría por alto en su atlas. Estudios realizados a partir del siglo XXI por María Eugenia Jurado y Camilo Camacho, 2004, y Camilo Camacho, 2007, dan cuenta de alrededor de 17 modelos distintos usados por los pueblos indígenas Yoreme, Guarijío, Nahua, Tenec, Totonaco, Mazateco, Amuzgo, Tzotzil y Celtal. El libro, coordinado por Alejandro Martínez, del 2018, reúne artículos de 9 autores. Estos textos profundizan en el estudio de arpas ya documentadas previamente. Si a estos 17 modelos, uno de esos ya en desuso, sumamos las arpas del ámbito mestizo, tenemos en torno a una veintena de arpas diferentes, como ya se dijo anteriormente. Todas estas arpas, de las que han dado cuenta los autores mencionados, como se sabe, son arpas diatónicas, con una sola hilera de cuerdas. Esta circunstancia ha llevado a creer que el modelo diatónico ha sido el único presente en las prácticas musicales del ámbito popular mexicano. En otras palabras, en resumen, los trabajos en torno al arpa en México se han centrado en 2 tipos de arpas. Uno, las diatónicas de los ámbitos popular y tradicional. 2, las arpas de pedales del ámbito de salón, orquestal y académico, que son harina de otro costal y de las cuales no voy a hablar en esta ocasión. Nuevas y viejas evidencias del uso del arpa cromática en el ámbito de la música popular en México. En 1930, en su libro El folclor musical de las ciudades, Rubén M. Campos escribió, cito: "El arpa popular es un instrumento con las cuerdas al aire, algunas veces entrecruzadas sin que se toquen entre sí, y que sirven una para formar la escala de tonos y otra para los semitonos. Esta combinación ingeniosa hace del arpa popular un instrumento completo que produce un sonido en las cuerdas agudas y de tripa y un sonido en los bordones graves de los bajos. Es un elemento indispensable en las pequeñas orquestas de los pueblos. Fin de cita. En este párrafo, que pasó desapercibido para los estudiosos del arpa durante 95 años, entre esos estudiosos me incluyo yo, y agradezco al maestro Eloy Cruz el haber hecho de mi conocimiento esta cita, Campos hace referencia sin lugar a dudas a la utilización de un modelo cromático de arpa popular con 2 filas de cuerdas, una correspondía a la escala diatónica y otra contenía las alteraciones, y con hileras de cuerdas algunas veces entrecruzadas. Son muchas las preguntas que surgen de la lectura de lo escrito por Campos. ¿Cómo era esta arpa cromática? ¿Cuáles eran las características morfológicas del arpa a la que Campos hizo referencia? ¿De cuántas cuerdas constaba y cuál era la tesitura de este instrumento? ¿Dónde se construían? ¿Quiénes las construían? ¿Fue un modelo regional, nacional o se usó en otras geografías? ¿Qué repertorios se interpretaban con este instrumento? ¿Sus 2 órdenes siempre cruzados? ¿Fueron siempre cruzados o también las había con órdenes paralelos? Porque cito, algunas veces entrecruzadas, cierro cita, anotado por Campos, abre la posibilidad que también las hubiera con las filas dispuestas de forma paralela. En 2016, en la parte final del artículo Noticias del arpa de 2 órdenes en la Nueva España, publicado en Cuadernos de Música Iberoamericana, además de probar la presencia del arpa española de 2 órdenes de cuerdas cruzadas en las prácticas musicales de 2 catedrales novohispanas, Valladolid, Michoacán y Puebla, en el primer tercio del siglo XVIII, documenté también la presencia de un arpa cromática en el ámbito popular queretano a mediados del siglo XIX. Según las leyendas y tradiciones queretanas, escritas por Valentín F. Frías, publicadas en 1900, el músico que tañía este instrumento entre 1840 y 1870 para amenizar las reuniones y días de campo de los sectores acomodados de la sociedad queretana, o también los fandangos de bandidos de la zona, era conocido como Pancho el Arpero. Sin más información disponible en esa época, cuando publiqué dicho artículo, entonces pensé que el arpa que tocaba Francisco Silva, nombre de Pancho el Arpero, en Querétaro y sus alrededores, era probablemente una arpa barroca de 2 órdenes construida durante el virreinato y que había sobrevivido pasando del ámbito religioso al ámbito secular. Tiempo después, la revisión de las fotografías que forman parte del álbum Estudiantina Queretana de 1885, de Ignacio Muñoz Flores, me permitió ubicar el arpa que ahora ven. Es esta el arpa. Esta arpa de dimensiones medianas, columna recta, oídos circulares en la tapa, caja de resonancia, construida con duelas, patas cortas. Aquí abro un paréntesis, cabe mencionar que las fotografías con las que cuento son una versión digital de baja resolución que la Galería López Quiroga subió a su página de internet en 2012. Aún así, cierro el paréntesis, aún así es posible distinguir que en el clavijero, espero que lo puedan distinguir ustedes allá en el auditorio y también quienes están conectados al Zoom, es posible distinguir que en el clavijero hay lo que parece ser una doble hilera de clavijas en esta parte, así como una doble fila de botoncillos en la tapa. En esta parte hay 2 filas de botoncillos, además de que se puede apreciar cómo las cuerdas se entrecruzan en la parte de los bordones, en la parte alta de los bordones y hacia las cuerdas agudas en esta parte. En una primera revisión de las arpas cromáticas que forman parte de distintos museos de instrumentos, como el de Berlín, el de la Cité de la Musique, el Metropolitan, el de Nuremberg y otros museos, no he encontrado modelos parecidos al que vemos ahora. Lo anterior permite establecer, al menos provisionalmente, que este es un modelo no documentado de arpa cromática. Las anotaciones hechas en el álbum y documentos hemerográficos que hacen referencia a esta estudiantina nos revelan la identidad del tañedor de este instrumento, Diego Almaraz y Guillén. Es decir, hasta ahora contamos con 2 nombres de tañedores de este modelo de instrumento. Francisco Silva, conocido como Pancho el Arpero, y este integrante de Estudiantina Queretana. Por la época en que Muñoz Flores tomó las fotos para su álbum, 1885, por la coincidencia geográfica, estas 2 arpas se ubican en Querétaro, que está al centro de México, y por el hecho de que las menciones conocidas ubican este instrumento en el ámbito popular, es probable que este también fuera el instrumento que pulsó Pancho el Arpero hasta 1870. Es la hipótesis que tengo, que era este modelo, ¿no? Si este fuera el caso y que el arpa mencionada por Rubén M. Campos corresponde también a este modelo, se podría situar provisionalmente el uso de este instrumento entre 1840 y 1930, 90 años, ¿no? En caso contrario, se podría hablar de la presencia de modelos distintos de arpas cromáticas en las prácticas populares en este mismo periodo. Me inclino más a considerar la presencia de un solo modelo, aunque es necesario seguir con las investigaciones. Del repertorio interpretado sabemos que en esta arpa se tocaba entre 1840 y 70 música para bailar, cito, varsovianas y otros bailes de la época, cierro cita, y que en los fandangos se ejecutaban las margaritas y los queleles. También que en estas se acompañaban corridos como el de la tragedia de la Carambada, que era una bandida ahí del rumbo de Querétaro, o composiciones humorísticas como el Cieguito y la Almoneda. No sabemos si el arpista de la fotografía también ejecutaba este tipo de piezas. Lo que sí es que hacia 1885 este instrumento formaba parte de una estudiantina, integrada por instrumentos de cuerda pulsada y frotada. De las preguntas planteadas anteriormente, quedan muchas aún sin poder responderse. Conclusiones preliminares. El modelo cromático del arpa estuvo presente en las prácticas musicales del Virreinato de México en el siglo XVIII, que eran arpas españolas de dos órdenes, y del México independiente al menos hasta el primer tercio del siglo XX, que es el otro modelo que ahora vemos aquí en la pantalla. En el modelo que aparece en la pantalla confluyeron conocimientos, técnicas y soluciones que respondieron a las necesidades musicales y estéticas de distintos grupos sociales del México del siglo XIX e inicios del siglo XX. Probada la presencia de al menos del arpa en las prácticas históricas musicales de lo que hoy es México, es necesario proseguir con el trabajo de documentación que ofrezca nuevos detalles en torno a este instrumento y las funciones que desempeñó en la música popular. Otra tarea, ya para terminar, importante por realizar, es rastrear documentos organológicos, buscar a los instrumentos que puedan ofrecer más información sobre la morfología, la extensión, las técnicas y materiales utilizados en la construcción de este instrumento decimonónico. Porque si se dan cuenta, las fuentes de las que ahora disponemos son fuentes, por un lado, escritas, y por el otro lado, esta afortunada fuente iconográfica, pero sería importante buscar, hacer pesquisas para tratar de localizar alguno de estos instrumentos. Con esto concluyo, les agradezco mucho su atención.
Muchas gracias, Edmundo, por tu presentación. Si te puedes quedar en línea unos minutos. Ahora vamos a la presentación de Jamie Kurland, que va a hablar sobre la utilización de la perspectiva de la historia laboral en las colecciones de instrumentos. Un estudio de caso sobre las trabajadoras de Fender.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Glad I asked. How about this? All right. While most musical instruments in our collections are attributed to male makers and company founders, such singular attributions do not necessarily tell the full story about how many musical instruments were made. We know that women, minorities, and immigrant workers of the working class have contributed their labor to instrument making, from small workshops to large-scale factories around the world. A great deal of scholarship on instrument companies done by people in our field and even in this very room has unearthed stories of workers, unions, and strikes, manufacturing processes, and a myriad other themes which show the complexity of musical instrument manufacturing. This is all to say that the contributions of workers are worthy of attribution, and thus exploring these worker stories is one way we can diversify the stories we tell in our collections. For my dissertation, I am exploring the roles that women played at Fender Electric Instruments Company during the company's mythologized golden age between 1946 and 1965. Every few years, publishers have released new books on Leo Fender, his company, and his signature musical instruments. The books often tell the same story, a rags to riches tale about a quirky tinkerer, Clarence Leonidas Leo Fender, who built his company from a struggling small factory in Fullerton, California, not far from his childhood home, to an empire of instrument production in Southern California. Like many history, these books rarely mention the company's female workers in any substantive way, beyond including photos, which rarely include captions of their names, despite their work being a key part of the company's workforce. Thus, an exploration of the labor of women within the Fender factory not only enriches the history of Fender, but also the history of Mexican-American women in Southern California in the post-World War II era. In my presentation today, I will share a few of my methods and approaches in getting at some of these somewhat hidden histories, many of which are influenced by studies in labor history, Chicana history, and spatial history. Oh no, okay. This happened once before when I gave a presentation, and I'm just now remembering it did. All right, so bear with me. So that amp was played by Neil Young and is in the collection in Calgary, and what you're not seeing is what I will describe right now. While the signature logo is stamped on every Fender headstock or amp, handwritten signatures of the women who worked at Fender are found within many instruments from this period. In the mid-1950s, Fender instituted a quality control measure which required workers to sign their names on instruments they worked on to ensure that they were inspected before the next stage of production. Signatures may be found under a guitar's pickguard or at the base of its neck or on a small piece of masking tape, imagine if you will, affixed to the chassis of an amplifier. And these strips of masking tape often bear the first name of Fender's female women, workers, like Lupe, Lydia, and Esperanza. In lieu of official company records that have these women's names, these small signatures have guided my research. So I've used genealogical databases and census records, and those were the starting points for tracking down roughly 20 women who worked for Fender in the earliest part of this period. Oh, it's there. So you can see the masking tape, which is actually trimmed with pinking shears, sewing shears, and that says Lily, and that is Lily standing next to Leo. In one remarkable case, I tracked down one of Fender's first employees. In March of 2023, I traveled to conduct an oral history and meet Geraldine, seen here, who worked for the company between 1949 and 1951. Listening to her, she's 94 now, and just as sharp as a tack, just super, super amazing. Listening to her testimony, as well as other oral histories of Fender employees, has helped me understand their perspectives on their work. So why did Fender hire women? Well, much labor scholarship has focused on how women and minorities have been exploited due to their intersectional identities. My dissertation contributes to recent scholarship problematizing gendered labor and centering the perspectives of the women workers themselves. In my project, I am most interested in understanding the labor to which women were assigned, the skills they developed in doing such work, and how their work impacted their daily lives, including their social experiences and their future career aspirations. An issue with uncovering these stories of those on the margins is the lack of readily available primary sources. Thank goodness, there are oral histories. Recently, the US 1950 census was digitized, which has really been helpful. And I've also used mapping to better understand what their lives were like. Extant literature often states that Fender hired women to wire amps and wind pickups due to their supposed nimble fingers and tolerance for tedious work. These pervasive gendered stereotypes are seen throughout labor history and obscure the learned skills which they brought to their work. In speaking with Geraldine, I learned that she was a talented amateur seamstress, as were many women who worked at Fender. I'm not sure whether the company knew this when they hired these women, as it was a typical skill that was passed down by mothers and grandmothers to their daughters during this time. Geraldine remembered her grandmother taught her how to sew on a treadle sewing machine, and that she was not allowed to sew on cloth until she could sew a straight line on paper, which required time and practice. She honed these skills through her teens and made her own clothing while working for Fender, including the checkered shirt you see in this photo, which she told me when I interviewed her, oh yeah, I made that shirt. And you can see the process is very similar. Her foot, not the foot in the saddle shoe that you can see there, but on the other side is pressing a foot pedal that is actually very similar, if not from a repurposed sewing machine. And I include the photo of a woman at a sewing machine to illustrate how similar the processes were. There are really very real connections between using a sewing machine and winding pickups, and the earliest pickup winding machines were made out of repurposed sewing machines, like ones made by Les Paul and Fender. Like a sewing machine, this is when you're making pickups, wire like thread was wound on a spinning bobbin, the speed of which was determined by the pressure of the worker that they put on the foot pedal. So branching out into thinking more about these experiences, you know, for many companies, it was very economically advantageous to hire young women since they were considered temporary and typically paid less than their male counterparts. Union documentation that I found showed that this was true at Fender, although it was not unique or unusual. Women made less than their male counterparts, but this was very typical in many industries. However, in talking to Geraldine, I started to realize that, you know, Fender did pay more than other jobs available to women in Orange County during this time, partially because Orange County during the 1950s was quite segregated, and many women were just not included in the workforce. So many of Fender's women grew up with instead of having to work in the agricultural industry or canning, which their parents had done, as I found in the census records, these women were able to ascend their social status. One of the women, Irene, was a Rosita the Riveter during World War II and later worked for Fender for many years. So working at Fender was much more comfortable in some ways than harvesting fruit, which was physically demanding, and these industries often paid too little and treated their laborers very poorly. Census records show that Lydia Sanchez Jaime's father worked as an orange picker, as did Irene and Maybelle's father, Ramon, who worked as a farm laborer in 1930. So I've been looking at multiple census records as well. Geraldine's aunt worked in a citrus packing house, actually winning awards for packing citrus the fastest. And her stepfather worked in the adjacent fertilizer industry. So I also learned that Fender hired new factory workers based on personal recommendations from his employees. Maybelle Ortega, who is said to be one of the first he hired, brought her sister into the fold. Geraldine brought her mother to work for the company. So it seemed like Fender trusted the staffing recommendations of his employees, and probably appreciated not having to pay for job advertisements. But by recommending trustworthy people from their social and familial networks, Fender's women employees helped support their community in attaining gainful employment, while also making their time at work more pleasant by working with friends. In the early 1960s, amplifier designer Alexander Dumble took a tour of the factory and observed a group of women sitting around a table. He said, "They were assembling all the circuits. It was hilarious. It was basically a big coffee klatch. All these gals sitting around smoking cigarettes and gabbing away, with their hands moving 1,000,000 miles an hour. They were enjoying each other's company, but were also very efficient." So the women at Fender also were able to ascend, like I said, their social situation. Geraldine was able to pay for college, and working at Fender afforded her a sense of flexibility with her schedule. She would work into the late hours of the night. But another key component of my research has been understanding Orange County at this time, as it really tells us more about the factory operations. So I've used, here are some more photos of women working. I digitized a 1950 Automobile Club of California map and geo-rectified it, so it's mapped onto a modern map so that I can find locations in the present. So using this map, I have been able to map the home locations of the employees that I've found so far. And what this has done is really show me that the locations of the Mexican-American women's homes track with the de facto segregation of Orange County in the mid-century. Mexican-Americans were not really welcome to live in many parts of Anaheim, especially when looking for new places to live. So before Anaheim became known as the home of Disneyland, it was predominantly home to lower middle and middle class residents, while the neighboring Fullerton to the north was home to some of the most wealthy enclaves in the county. And there were many racial covenants in Fullerton that prohibited the sale of homes to people of color. This map has also helped me think about the commutes of these women, what their time on the bus would be like, what the soundscape of their experiences would be. And so that's still forthcoming. I haven't fully fleshed that out. But what I do know is that Fender's workers were able to afford recreation and participate more broadly in activities in the mid-century. The company sponsored bowling teams and other sports. Geraldine played softball, and there were always holiday parties every year. There. Understanding the lives of the women workers counters the fetishization of their labor on the vintage guitar market. Instruments from Fender's golden age have continued relevance today as musicians continue to play them, and vintage guitars are sought-after commodities. Fender's guitar from this period are not only prized for their sound, but also for their cultural importance. Instruments bearing the names of Lupe, Lily, Esper, Abigail provide extra authenticity and value, selling for more than those without. And I've actually seen a piece of the masking tape sold on eBay for $200. Collectors often personify their instruments using the names of these women. On Fender message boards, users fetishize these objects, discussing my Lupe and my Lily and asking questions like, I wonder if she was hot back in the day. Musicologist Eric Brose recently argued that the discourses on these message boards often reinforces the handmade nature of these objects that, quote, fetishizes the hands and fingers of the women who assembled them. I aim for my project to humanize these craftswomen rather than objectifying them by privileging their lived experiences. I hope to give them a voice and argue that their labor and skill and lived experiences represent an unrecognized contribution to the history of the electric guitar and popular music more broadly. So as this later advertisement states, it is the name that makes a difference. I agree, and knowing the other names found within these instruments changes how we think about the Fender company. This case study, I hope, offers an opportunity for us to think about how worker stories can help fill gaps in the histories of major manufacturers. And I would like to ask or discuss, either now or later, how we can better represent the stories of workers within our museums. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Noemi. Bueno, ahora, muchas gracias. Lo presento a Jean-Philippe Echard, que nos va a hablar sobre el violín y transculturación en una exposición renovada en el Musée de la Musique de Paris.
Hello, hola, do you hear me? Yes? Okay. So there is you hear me, really? No. Closer? Okay, like that? Okay. Hola. May I have my presentation, please? Thank you. So the topic is, I try to link the topic of this conference here in Mexico to an ongoing project which is renovating the galleries in the Musée de la Musique in Paris. I'm one of the 4 curators here about carrying of this collection. And you see on this image, which is on the homepage of the website of the Musée de la Musique, that the museum is closed. So we are fully closed on end of June, and we will fully reopen mid-May next year. So it involves all my colleagues, and to give you an idea of numbers, we exhibit, until now, we exhibited about 950 objects in the galleries, and we have removed from June 25th 485 instruments, and we will, at the end, after this process, we will bring back in the collections about 600 objects. So it's a lot of movement, a lot of changes, and the idea is to rework the museography so that our narrative and the experience of the visitor is less guided by a Eurocentric narrative and discourse and a more global perspective. So we'll try to reconnect musical culture all around the world, and also to have more input of contemporary issues, contemporary topics of discussions in society. Voilà. So we want also to have a less top-down approach in what the information, so it's not more information we give, or knowledge we give, but we want to trigger critical thinking, raising awareness, this kind of approach. So it's quite big, as I told you, in the number of objects. For those of you who know already the galleries, we will empty, we have emptied nine glass cases of the first 4 galleries, and the 5th gallery is totally flat, empty to the concrete floor, now to be completely reworked. We are also taking this opportunity to modify the labels concerning vernacular names. We removed the anonymous, and we will replace it by unidentified maker. And we will have a full field with the full known provenance of each object on the labels of the newly exhibited object. So the topic here, I'm the violin curator. I'm going to talk here about the violin glass case we are going to renew as an example of this approach, which involved more me. So is this going on? I hope so, yes. So I give you a little tour for those who doesn't know. So when you approach this area, maybe you can when you approach the area, this is like the smaller space of the museum, and it's like in the middle of the experience of the visitor. And this is a tiny space, low ceiling. There are stairs before, and this is the Stradivarius showcase, so it's like a cube, it's like the crowns, jewels of our collection, if I may say. And so this is the only showcase you can rotate around. And in the back, you see the violin glass case. Here, this is a glass case with the instruments, evoking the instruments necessary to play a Beethoven symphony. So all of this is very European, and Stradivarius, Beethoven. And eventually, I will finish my little movie by showing you in the space this kind of strangely shaped glass case, triangular shaped glass case with this violin typology, as we name it. So here is a steady image of this glass case, and the current state of the museography was exhibiting plenty of instruments of the violin family, and bows as well. And if you see 65 items, 65 instruments made in 4 countries of Europe, Italy, France, Germany, United Kingdom, and that's it. So no non-European instrument was exhibited. Also, the time span is quite interesting. It was stopping at the end of the 19th century. The most recent instrument was 1879. So I'm now going to give you this quote of Yehudi Menuhin. So he's like the parangon, the archetype maybe of the soloist of European classical music. And he said, of course, he's a violin player, he loves violin, he says, violin is the biggest instrument, etc. But what is, to me, I keep from what he says is the last bit. Also because this violin is flexible enough to acclimatize to different musical traditions. In his words, he would say that, of course, this kind of, it's maybe dated, it's very specific, but he approached Indian music playing with Ravi Shankar in the past. So, and when you look now, so it's a brief tour with images of violin is everywhere, if I may say. So for instance, in India, and it developed in certain way of electrification, adding the fifth strings or other modifications. This is a keroncong ensemble in Indonesia, where they have this 3-string cello. In other places of like Europe, Northern Europe, British Islands, like Dublin, Scotland, Norway, violins everywhere. Romania, France, a violoneux, violin cornetta, it's quintet. And anyway, you see the image speak for themselves. Mexicans, so Cartier-Bresson and Salgado photographed these persons. Madagascar, 2 photographs on the left, Madagascar, and it was a French colony at the time of these pictures. And Northern America, for jazz and other musics. Bluegrass, Bob Dylan with violin, French rock on the bottom, and a few experimental jazz, electronic music. So it's not, this glass case that was existing is interesting, but has its limitations. So the idea was to try to address this topic in a broadened approach. But of course, you've seen the shape of the glass case. We cannot mention every culture, everything in the world that do this. Also, I'm a little French guy, and I cannot connect to every community in the world with proper authority or representative of the use of a violin in this or that style or this or that social group. So it's a big disadvantage in a way. Also, as I said, we want to encourage discussion, so it's very difficult for us to to know where to put the limit in what we say, what we impose in a way, on what we let open. Of course, our collection is mostly European classical music instruments, so we are depending on loans from long-term loans from other institutions to have relevant objects. And of course, we have more and more, and it's still ongoing, budget constraints on the project, so it's very difficult. But anyway, the idea was that we say, of course, it's important in Western classical music culture. The violin was invented in Italy, and it's still a very important object of the orchestra. But we want to broaden the approach, as illustrated by the pictures I showed before. And maybe the idea we are trying to do is to use a guide for the visitor with the objects, to use some visual patterns, for instance, the shape of sound holes, the shape of the scroll, the shape of the body and the C bows to let the bow play, as a guide for the visitor to experience the diversity of shapes and visual things. And then he may look at the labels and the origins, etc., of the object. So, thank you. This would be like for the quartet and the classical music instruments. So from 65 items, we go from 10 to 10, you know, 5 instruments, 5 bows, and that's it. Then we add more instruments. Some of them are in our collection, some not. And like a Gibson violin, industrially made, I mean, all these things. I'm going faster because the time is short now. We found other objects in other museums as well. So in Musée du Quai Branly in Paris, they have these instruments they have gathered, so they accepted the long-term loans. And we purchased with Alexandre a Keroncong cello from Indonesia, so like a very recent instrument. And this is in our collection, so we open it also to questioning even the visual, like the shapes, and then the acoustics and how it works, etc. So this would be like the diversity of the type, like to broaden the thing while still being centered around a single instrument. In order to compensate in a way for all the objects that we cannot have and we cannot show, we have considered the iconography as part of the glass case. And the difficult thing is in the whole museum, we have no illustrative iconography. We only have works of art, according to the standards, I mean, whatever it means, but works of art. So there was a balance to find photographs illustrating and broadening again, like the lacks we would be having in the instruments with images. And also it shows a few rare playing contexts, and also playing techniques in a way. Where does the violin stand on the shoulder or not? So this would be certainly these 3 images that will be shown as nice prints, of photographic prints. And so this is currently the state of the glass case on the right. It's empty, except the double bass that could stay there, and it was too big to move. And some rendering, and of course a lot of discussions, a lot of work as shown here. And this is not finished, and the glass case is empty, and we need to prepare it in 7 weeks. So it should approximately be like that, but it will sure change because of mounts, because of other issues, practical issues. But the interesting thing I like is we basically keep the same number of instruments exhibited in the glass case, and except we reduce drastically the number of bows, 37 we go down to 5. And Europe, we go from 65 to about 20 instruments from Europe, and among the 20, there are instruments from a wider Europe than before. And the rest of the world, it's not 0 anymore. We have 5 instruments from Northern America, 3 to 5 from Latin America, etc. So, I mean, numbers are not the only thing that counts, but for us, it's kind of illustrating the trend that we are trying to do. So it's not a finalized project. We will still have surprises, more budget cuts, etc. But at least this is the spirit. So I acknowledge everyone mentioned here and you for your attention. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Jean-Philippe. Bueno, pasamos a la tanda de preguntas y antes de pasarle a Maya, quiero agradecer la mesa que me tocó acompañar, porque la verdad es que es súper interesante cada una de las propuestas. Yo me fui anotando algunas palabras claves, como lo que refiere a la tradición oral, que está muy relacionado con tu tema y la de la primera mesa, y que también va a tener que ver mucho con tu propuesta. Después hablaremos también. Bueno, doy paso a las preguntas. Maya.
Thank you all for these wonderful expositions, and James, it's so important and sensible research. Bravo. My question, in fact, is pour Jean-Philippe. Je vais parler rapidement en français, comme ça. Bon. Je vois que ta réflexion est très axée sur la pratique musicale. Toutes les photos que tu nous as montrées sur différents contextes pratiques de l'utilisation des violons et de la famille des violons. Est-ce qu'il y aurait une perspective d'écoute? Ah, sí, sí. Bueno, veo que tu reflexión es muy basada en la práctica musical. Entonces, todas las fotos que nos has mostrado son de prácticas diferentes con el violín. Ah, sí, pero ella... Ah, no tienes. Ah, sí, sí. Sí, sí. Jonathan traduce después. Hay una perspectiva de sistema de écoute musical, de escucha,
Okay.
de diferentes prácticas musicales.
In addition to the glass case by itself, we have in the museum a device. It's a Visio guide with a lot of video and audio examples accompanying this. I had not the time to show it today. And we are thinking of like the main soundtrack, I mean, a sound on video track accompanying the general glass case to have a mix, I mean, short bits of like a panel of hearing violin in various places.
I was going to ask about kind of the same thing. I was really curious as to how, even though I know it's all kind of draft pending money and everything, but the choice of the 3 pictures and what kind of political wrangles you found yourself in as you've pursued these new directions with this material, which for some is like really sacred.
Which?
Like pushing the violin family display in this direction. What kind of political issues have you found at your institution in pursuing this direction?
Yeah, difficult answer. Let's say the struggle, my main struggle, and the team also, was to put side by side objects which, because I need to say first that most of our visitors are French or European. Let's put it this way. And we are in an institution which is very well known for classical music, etc. So once this said, the main struggle was to put side by side instruments that are perceived as high quality because of their high finish and the very fine finish, and instruments that are unvarnished, for instance, or that have rough cutting the boards, etc. And we don't want to induce a comparison, inducing like high quality, low quality. This was a very, I don't know if it's a political struggle, but at least it was a struggle. As for politics, it's maybe linked also with the naming of the object. Is it a violon or is it a vielle? Organologically speaking, is it a violin or a fiddle? And we decided to put violon, so violin, everywhere for all the instruments. I mean, there may be reactions, but this is something like a move I wanted to address, to put all the objects in. So some objects have vernacular names as well, they are kept. But as type, as what is this object type, we wrote violin. And the idea is, maybe it's a mistake in terms of organology, but the idea is put all of them at the same level of seeing and understanding and things like that. But maybe we will have to change in the future. We'll see.
Thank you. I have many questions for the
Tengo
three of you,
muchas
but
preguntas para
we are
los
just very
tres.
tight in time. Not
Estamos
that
un
tight,
poco
but
apretados de tiempo, sin
first of all,
embargo,
I would like
primero
to
que nada
acknowledge
me
the great
gustaría
work that Jamie
conocer,
has done. I think this is just a little part
reconocer
of the work
el gran
of the
grado
great database
de
that you
Grace,
have
de toda
created
esta
on
base de
women
datos que
in
has
woodworking
creado
and women in
sobre
musical
las
instruments
mujeres
construction. I would like to
artesanas en la
congratulate
construcción de instrumentos
because not many
musicales.
of us
Me gustaría
is,
felicitarte
aware
porque
of it,
no
and
muchos de
that's so
nosotros
important
se han
for what
embarcado
we
en
do.
esa tarea y es
Not
tan
only
importante
because
para
you
lo que
are
hacemos y no
making
solo
visible,
porque estás haciendo visibles
through the eyes of gender,
a
a
través de
work
los
that
ojos
has
del
been
género,
before.
un trabajo que ha
But because
estado
you are really,
oculto,
your work is really
sino
intense and
porque
professional.
tu trabajo es
And I
muy
think
intenso y
this Fender
profesional
makes
y creo
me
que
think about
la
a
marca
friend of ours,
Fender
Claudia.
me hace
She worked at
recordar.
Fender, like 10 years ago,
Claudia
in
trabajó en
making
Fender hace como 10
So
años
this
en la
is
fabricación
an
de
actual,
cuerdas.
not problem,
Así
an
que
actual situation in
esta
our
es una
time.
situación muy real en nuestra
Is
época
I think
también.
that the
Creo
labels and big
que
enterprises are
las
still
grandes
being,
empresas
this, big
y
umbrella
marcas
that
es como
some kind of,
todo un gran
they don't
paraguas
show
que
these
abarca
particular things.
y no muestran estos casos en particular. Dos comentarios que me gustaría mencionar ahí. Parte del proyecto tenía que crear ciertos límites respecto a la globalización de Fender, Japón y México, como la compañía ha cambiado y las mujeres han sido parte de todas estas fábricas. Ahora, pensando en cuerdas y otros materiales, los tubos de vacío que se utilizaban como amplificadores por RCA en realidad eran fabricados por mujeres, así que todo esto cambia la perspectiva de todos estos objetos cuando vemos la mano de obra que se utilizó.
Thank you, Jamie. And another
Gracias,
really small
Jamie.
comment to Jean-Philippe.
Otro comentario para Jean-Philippe.
I do remember that in
Recuerdo
Prague,
que en Praga mencionaste en tu intervención, no recuerdo si era una contribución o un comentario, lo difícil que era en ese momento presentar un proyecto que fuera tan revolucionario para una exhibición permanente. Así que si se plantea la cuestión de ¿qué debe significar una exhibición permanente? Debemos reconsiderar, y no solo desde el punto de vista institucional, sino de las personas que suelen ir a lugares y se sienten en casa y pueden cambiar todo. Me da mucho gusto ver esta evolución. Así que felicidades por todo el trabajo que han hecho y también al equipo del Museo de la Música en París, en Francia. Edmundo, muchas gracias por estar con nosotros.
Tu ponencia fue de verdad
Thank you very much for being with us. Your presentation was enlightening. Me gustaría decir que también es experto en arpas, no solo en México, sino también en América Latina. Gracias por tu contribución generosa. ¿Tenemos más tiempo o sería todo?
¿Más preguntas? Matthew.
Any other question? Matthew, of course.
I mean it, like enduringly.
Okay.
Ya
I
veo.
have two.
¿Qué pasó?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I have a question.
Tengo
for
una
both of,
pregunta
you, Jamie.
para ambos.
And first, Jamie, I
Primero,
have to join the chorus on
Jamie, me
amazing
uno
research.
al coro
And it
de
is
felicitaciones,
so
una
important.
investigación
And I
sorprendente, tan
especially love,
importante. Me
you know, when you
encantó
referred to,
cuando te
all the
referías
books on Fender.
a todos los
And these guitar
trabajos
books have
que
been the
se
bane of my
hacían en
existence,
Fender. Esa guitarra
ever
marcó mi
since, you know, I
existencia,
started,
de hecho.
because they're all,
Y
well,
por
basically they're all done
supuesto,
by boomer guitar collectors
casi
who really do fetishize,
todos los coleccionistas cuentan
these
con
kind of
una
things. And to
de
see
esta
you
guitarra
doing
y
this,
ver que hayas hecho
with your,
esta
you know, your outlook and your
investigación
viewpoint and
con
that-
esta perspectiva, sí,
yes.
sí, sí, sí.
So absolutely wonderful. By the way, one also
Maravillosamente.
comment. You
Y
mentioned
también me
RCA
gustaría
and
hacer
thing.
un comentario. Mencionaste a
I
RCA.
do know that Fender, yes,
Yo
90%
sé que
of
el
the time, they
90%
were
del
using
tiempo
RCA,
Fender que
valve tubes.
utilizaba los
There are times
tubos.
when they would get
Hubo
Sylvania
ocasiones
as well, but I know
en
that
que
most of the
utilizaban otra marca,
RCA
Sylvania,
tubes that were being
y
made,
no sé si
that,
esos
like the
tubos
66, the
que eran
606,
hechos como el
and the
606
12AX7,
y
which
el
they used for, for the
1287
preamps.
que se utilizaba para
Most
los
of those were made in
preamplificadores.
Owensboro,
La mayoría de ellos se
in
hacían
the
en
RCA
Owensboro,
factory there.
en la
And I
fábrica
do
de
know for a
RCA.
fact
Y
that
sé de
you are
hecho
absolutely right
que tienes
about
toda la
them,
razón
having a
respecto
lot of women,
a que había
working there
muchísimas mujeres
during the 50s
trabajando
and
ahí
60s.
en la década de
And
los
for the
50
same
y
reasons you
60. Y
talked
por la
about
misma
at
razón
Fender,
que
in
mencionaste,
that it was,
a
yes, were they
Fender
treated
sí.
perfectly? No. But was it better
Eran
than the other
tratadas
jobs
de
that they
manera
could get in the
fantástica,
area,
no, pero tenían
Western Kentucky
la
not being a
característica de que
particularly,
tenían mejores condiciones,
prosperous
por
area.
ejemplo, en el
And
área de
so,
Kentucky
yes,
del
you're
oeste, no
definitely
era un
right on the
área
right track.
muy
Jean-Philippe,
próspera. Jean-Philippe,
I find it interesting
me
that
pareció
you,
interesante.
Christina and I, when we were at the
Cristina
Mint, had the
y
exact
yo
same problem
tenemos
and
exactamente
discussion
el mismo
that you
problema
had
en el
about what do
museo
we call these instruments.
en cuanto a
And I
cómo
find it
nombramos
interesting that
estos
after a
instrumentos.
lot
Me
of
parece interesante
soul-searching
que
and thought,
después
we
de
came to the
mucho pensamiento llegamos a la
conclusion.
cuestión
And
opuesta, a la
I can actually very
conclusión
much see your point, and I
opuesta.
think
Entiendo
that it kind of
perfectamente
points
tu
out
punto
that,
porque señala
it is,
que es
there is no such thing as the right, perfect
no
answer.
existe la
There's only coming up with an
respuesta
answer and
totalmente
then coming up with
perfecta.
good rationale and
Siempre hay que
justification.
darle cierta
And we
justificación
did, we wanted
lógica.
to use local names
Quisimos
for
utilizar
everything
nombres
because we
locales
did
para
not want to
todo,
put
porque
a
no
Western
queríamos
interpretation
hacer una interpretación
on something.
occidental
And so,
de
for
algo.
example,
Por ejemplo,
our copy of the
nuestra copia
octobase, we did not
de
call it an octobase, it was
octobase
an
no le
octobase.
llamamos octobase,
And
sino
we did
octobajo.
this for
Y también esto lo
everything.
hicimos con
So I
todo.
just say, I find
Así
it
que
interesting that,
me
you know,
parece
you grappled with the same thing
interesante
and came to the
que
exact opposite
llegaste
conclusion.
a una conclusión, aunque sea diferente. Y esto es muy cierto para mí. Gracias por tus comentarios. Podemos platicar esto de manera individual después. Hay una pregunta en línea. Paso el micrófono a la parte posterior, por favor.
Bueno, hacemos entonces la pregunta en línea.
We have an online question, and with this we are going
No estamos teniendo tiempo, la última pregunta en línea.
we're going to close. This is the last question
Good
online.
afternoon. Well, congratulations to
Buenas.
the of you. Can you hear me? Yes.
¿Me pueden escuchar? Buenas tardes a
My
todos.
question is to Jean-Philippe as
Mi
well,
felicitación
because
a
you addressed
Jean-Philippe
problem
porque
of classification
ha
of
resuelto
instruments,
un
which is
problema de
also
clasificación en
something
los
that
instrumentos.
a lot.
Y esto ha sido un problema de mucho tiempo. Mi pregunta es, ¿han considerado tomar la perspectiva de los intérpretes reales para la exhibición o sus ideas y ver cómo esto empata con sus conclusiones o hacer participar a los músicos en ese proyecto? No solo mostrando los instrumentos, sino también mostrar las perspectivas e ideas en la exhibición.
Yes, thank you very much for your question.
Sí, muchas gracias por la pregunta.
The Musée de la Musique is
El
located in the
Museo
Philharmonie de Paris,
de
and
la
the Philharmonie de Paris,
Música está ubicado
some
en
of my
la
colleagues are the
Filarmónica
member of
de
the
París.
Orchestre de
Algunos de
Paris,
los colegas son
so
miembros
they
de la
are
Orquesta
classical music
de
musicians, but they are
París, son
musicians.
músicos de música
And also,
clásica.
every day
Y
in the
también
Music
todos
Museum,
los días en el Museo
a
de la
different
Música
musician
tenemos
comes to
un
play for
músico
the visitor
diferente
of
que
that
viene
day and
a
interact and
interpretar,
engage with
a tocar
them. So we are
e
in,
interactúa con los
daily
visitantes.
connection
Tenemos una
with
conexión
musicians,
diaria con
not
los
every
músicos
musician, of course, but
y, por
of,
supuesto,
musicians.
son músicos, como mencioné.
Where we can make progress
En donde
is,
podemos avanzar en esa área sería
find,
encontrar,
at least in Paris
al
or
menos
Paris region,
en París o en la región parisina,
people representing,
gente que
I don't know if there is a
represente,
Mexican
no
community
sé,
of
una
musicians
comunidad
in Paris,
mexicana
etc.
de
We need to
músicos
find and
en
locate
París.
them
Sería cuestión de investigar y
to
buscar,
contact them
contactarlos
if they are, locally to interact
para
with them.
interactuar con ellos de manera local.
This we do for some acquisitions,
Esto lo hicimos con
the
algunas
ones that are led by my
adquisiciones
colleague Alexandre, and,
que hicimos
we do
anteriormente,
this mainly for, some
principalmente
African musics.
para
And,
música
yes, we could
africana
improve
con
that.
músicos
Thank you very
africanos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Gracias, Jean-Philippe, Jaime.
Thank you, Jean-Philippe and
Y con
Edmundo.
esto damos por cerrada la mesa y hay mucho por hablar en los pasillos también. Buenas tardes.
It was great.
Thanks, yours too. You know, I've